My God, you look exactly like her. Khalil al-Mansouri's voice trembled as he stared at the young black woman cleaning his office windows, his coffee cup slipping from nerveless fingers to shatter against the marble floor. The resemblance was impossible, terrifying in its precision, every feature a mirror of the daughter who had vanished from his life 22 years ago when his wife fled their marriage in the dead of night. Amina looked up from her work with startled eyes, the same warm brown that had haunted his dreams for over 2 decades, and in that moment, Khalil felt the carefully constructed walls around his heart begin to crumble. What he was about to discover would shatter everything he believed about family, betrayal, and the price of choosing pride over love. The Burj Khalifa's 93rd floor offered a view that encompassed all of Dubai, from the glittering coastline where luxury hotels pierced the sky like crystalline needles, to the vast desert beyond, where ancient traditions still shaped modern fortunes. Khalil's executive suite occupied the entire floor, its glass walls providing panoramic vistas that served as constant reminders of the empire he had built through ruthless determination and strategic brilliance. At 58, he commanded one of the Middle East's most successful investment firms, his decisions affecting markets across 3 continents, while his personal wealth numbered in the billions. Yet for all his achievements, the office felt more like a gilded prison than a symbol of success. The morning had begun like countless others over the past 2 decades, with Khalil arriving before dawn to review overnight market reports and prepare for meetings that would determine the fates of companies and careers across the region. His routine was as precise as Swiss clockwork, each task performed with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had learned to find purpose in productivity when meaning had been stripped from his personal life. The empty frames on his desk, once filled with family photographs, served as silent monuments to losses that time had failed to heal, despite his desperate attempts to bury grief beneath layers of professional accomplishment. Amina Hassan moved through the building's upper floors with the quiet efficiency that characterized the best commercial cleaning staff, her presence so unobtrusive that executives rarely noticed her existence, despite her daily maintenance of their pristine work environments. At 22, she possessed a natural grace that made even mundane tasks seem purposeful, her movements economical and precise as she navigated around expensive furniture and delicate equipment that represented more wealth than she would see in several lifetimes. Her work ethic was legendary among the building's management company, her reliability and attention to detail earning her assignment to the most prestigious floors where any mistake could result in immediate termination. The contrast between their worlds could not have been more stark. While Khalil commanded global respect and wielded influence that could reshape entire industries, Amina worked in the shadows of his success, her labor invisible to those who benefited from its results. She arrived each morning at 4 a.m. to complete her assigned floors before the executives arrived. Her presence erased so thoroughly that the gleaming surfaces and spotless windows appeared to maintain themselves through some form of corporate magic rather than human effort and dedication. What neither of them knew was that fate had been weaving their paths together for decades, creating circumstances that would eventually force a confrontation with truths that both had spent years trying to avoid. The window cleaning that brought them face to face was merely the final thread in a tapestry of connections that stretched back to choices made in anger and desperation, decisions that had shaped 2 lives, in ways that neither participant had fully understood, until this moment of recognition shattered their carefully constructed realities. Khalil's marriage to Farah had been arranged by their families when both were barely adults, a union designed to merge business interests and social standings rather than hearts or minds. The early years had been pleasant enough, marked by mutual respect and shared ambitions as they built their life together in Dubai's rapidly expanding business district. Khalil's entrepreneurial instincts and Farah's social connections created a powerful combination that opened doors and generated opportunities throughout the region's tight-knit elite circles. Their daughter Layla had been born during their 5th year of marriage, a beautiful child whose mixed heritage reflected both parents' backgrounds while creating something entirely new and precious. Khalil had adored her from the moment of birth, his fierce love for this tiny person revealing emotional depths that surprised him with their intensity. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, success in business seemed secondary to the simple joy of watching Layla discover the world around her her laughter and curiosity, bringing warmth to spaces that had previously known only ambition and calculation. But success in business required sacrifices that gradually eroded the foundation of their family life. Khalil's growing empire demanded constant attention, deals that required travel to distant cities, and negotiations that stretched late into the night while his wife and daughter waited at home for attention that became increasingly rare and distracted. Farah's frustration grew alongside his achievements. Her attempts to discuss their deteriorating relationship met with promises of change that were never kept, and explanations about important deals that always seemed to take priority over family time. The cultural pressures that shaped their social circle made honest communication nearly impossible. Farah's concerns about their marriage were dismissed by relatives who reminded her of her husband's success and her own privileged position, while Khalil's business associates reinforced his belief that providing financial security was the primary expression of love and responsibility. Neither possessed the tools or support systems necessary to bridge the growing emotional distance between them, their isolation from each other increasing with each missed dinner and cancelled family plan. The breaking point came during Layla's second birthday celebration, an elaborate party that Khalil had planned as a gesture of love, but which he ultimately missed due to an emergency meeting with investors from London. Farah's humiliation at having to explain his absence to their friends and family was compounded by the realization that their daughter barely seemed to notice her father's missing presence. Having grown accustomed to his unpredictable schedule and competing priorities, that night, as she watched Layla sleep peacefully despite the chaos surrounding her young life, Farah made a decision that would haunt both parents for decades. The note Khalil found 3 days later was brief and devastating, explaining that Farah could no longer live as a widow to his ambition, while watching their daughter grow up without a father, despite having one who lived in the same house. She had taken Layla somewhere he would never find them, she wrote, because she refused to raise a child who would learn that love was always secondary to business, and that family existed only when convenient for careers. The money and status that he valued so highly could not replace the presence and attention that children needed to develop into healthy adults. Khalil's search for them had been exhaustive and desperate, employing private investigators across multiple continents, while offering rewards that attracted thousands of false leads and cruel hoaxes. Every possible connection was explored, every friend and relative questioned, every database searched with the kind of systematic thoroughness that he had once applied to business acquisitions. The investigation consumed years of his life and millions of his fortune. But Farah had planned their disappearance with the same careful attention to detail that she had once applied to managing their household and social obligations. As the years passed without resolution, Khalil's grief transformed into something harder and more bitter, a combination of loss and rage that poisoned his remaining relationships and drove him to seek solace in professional achievements that felt increasingly meaningless. The empty house that had once echoed with laughter became a monument to his failures as a husband and father, while his business success felt like compensation for the only things that had ever truly mattered. He threw himself into work with manic intensity, building an empire that impressed the world while privately serving as a distraction from the emptiness that consumed his personal life. The irony was that his success made finding them more difficult rather than easier. Media attention meant that any public search efforts became news stories that could alert Farah to his investigations and prompt another disappearance. His high profile in business circles made discretion essential, while his wealth attracted scammers and attention seekers who complicated legitimate investigative efforts with false information and manufactured evidence. The very achievements that should have given him power to solve this problem instead became obstacles that protected his family's anonymity while advertising his desperation. 20 years of searching had yielded nothing but heartbreak and false hope. Investigators had traced possible sightings to cities across Europe, North America, and Africa, but every lead had evaporated under scrutiny, leaving Khalil with nothing but bills and renewed appreciation for how thoroughly someone could disappear when properly motivated. The daughter who haunted his dreams remained frozen at age 2 in his memory. A laughing toddler who would now be old enough to have children of her own, a woman whose entire life had unfolded beyond his knowledge or influence. The cleaning schedule that brought Amina to his office had been adjusted recently due to renovations on lower floors, shifting her routine to morning hours, when executives might still be present, rather than her usual pre-dawn schedule, when the building was empty except for security staff. The change meant increased risk of encountering the wealthy tenants whose privacy and comfort took absolute priority over the needs and convenience of service workers, but it also offered opportunities to earn overtime pay that could help support her family during difficult financial periods. Amina approached her work with the same systematic thoroughness that Khalil had once applied to business analysis, understanding that excellence in any field required attention to detail and consistent standards regardless of external recognition or appreciation. Her window cleaning technique had been perfected through years of practice, each motion calculated to achieve maximum effectiveness while minimizing time and effort. The squeegee moved across glass surfaces in precise patterns that left no streaks or spots, transforming grimy windows into transparent barriers that seemed to disappear entirely. The moment of recognition hit Khalil like a physical blow. 20 years of suppressed grief and desperate hope exploding into consciousness as he stared at features that belonged in his most treasured memories. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, the way she tilted her head when concentrating on detailed work, every gesture and expression was achingly familiar despite the impossible circumstances that had brought them together. His rational mind insisted that resemblance was coincidence, that grief and longing were creating connections that didn't exist, but his father's heart recognized truth that transcended logic or probability. Amina's startled reaction to his intense scrutiny revealed a sensitivity and intelligence that reminded him even more powerfully of the wife who had shared his dreams before they became his obsession. Her posture straightened with defensive dignity as she realized she was being examined rather than simply noticed, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness as she prepared for whatever uncomfortable interaction was about to unfold. Years of working in environments where her presence was barely tolerated had taught her to recognize when powerful people were about to make her life difficult for their own entertainment or convenience. The broken coffee cup that lay scattered across the marble floor seemed like evidence from another reality, physical proof that something extraordinary had just occurred in a life that had been carefully structured to avoid emotional surprises. Khalil stared at the mess, as if trying to understand how ceramic could shatter when his own world remained intact, though perhaps that was about to change as well. The silence that followed his shocked exclamation stretched between them like a bridge that neither knew how to cross, both recognizing that something significant was happening without understanding its full implications. When Amina finally spoke, her voice carried traces of education and refinement that seemed incongruous with her current circumstances, hints of a background that included privileges and opportunities that had somehow led to this moment of cleaning windows in office buildings. Her question was simple and direct, asking if she had done something wrong, or if he needed her to return later when he wouldn't be disturbed by her presence. The offer revealed both professionalism and experience with difficult clients, but also a dignity that refused to be diminished by circumstances or the obvious wealth disparity between them. Khalil's response came in fragments, as he struggled to process emotions that had been buried beneath decades of professional discipline and emotional numbness. His questions emerged without conscious planning, inquiries about her age and background that should have seemed inappropriate from a stranger, but somehow felt necessary for reasons neither of them yet understood. The interrogation was gentle but persistent, driven by desperate hope that fought against learned cynicism about the likelihood of miracles occurring in carefully ordered lives. The revelation of her full name hit him like a second shockwave, confirmation that the impossible was somehow becoming real despite everything he thought he knew about probability and fate. Amina Hassan carried part of her mother's identity while bearing physical resemblance that could not be explained by coincidence, the combination creating evidence that demanded investigation regardless of how unlikely the implications seemed. Years of failed searches had taught Khalil to distrust hope, but the woman standing in his office represented possibilities that he had never allowed himself to consider. Her story emerged gradually, as she responded to his increasingly personal questions with growing confusion but surprising openness. Born in Morocco 22 years ago, raised by a mother who had never spoken about family or background, educated in schools that her mother's secretive work had somehow funded despite their modest lifestyle, Farah Hassan had been a devoted parent, who provided everything her daughter needed while maintaining absolute silence about their past, creating a loving but mysterious foundation that had shaped Amina's entire understanding of her own identity. The details that followed painted a picture of a childhood marked by frequent moves and careful anonymity, a mother whose love was expressed through fierce protection and educational opportunities rather than explanations or extended family connections. Farah had worked as a translator and cultural consultant for international organizations, skills that allowed her to earn decent income while maintaining flexibility and privacy. Her daughter had grown up speaking multiple languages and understanding different cultures without ever learning about the wealthy father and privileged background that had been abandoned to protect her from a life where she would have been secondary to business interests. Medical records that Khalil requested through private investigators confirmed what his heart had already accepted. DNA testing, performed with hair samples taken from Amina's personal belongings, proved beyond scientific doubt that she was indeed his daughter, the child he had been searching for across 2 decades and 3 continents. The relief and joy that should have accompanied this discovery were complicated by growing understanding of how much life he had missed, how many moments and milestones had passed without his knowledge or participation. The confrontation with Farah, when it finally occurred, revealed depths of pain and resentment that 20 years had failed to heal. She had never remarried or formed serious relationships, her life dedicated entirely to protecting and raising the daughter whose father had chosen business over family with such consistency that she feared he would treat his child as another possession to be managed rather than a person to be loved. Her disappearance had been an act of desperation rather than cruelty, motivated by genuine terror that staying would damage Layla more than leaving ever could. The accusations that emerged during their initial meeting were devastating in their accuracy and heartbreaking in their implications. Farah described years of feeling like a widow whose husband was still alive, a single parent whose partner was physically present but emotionally absent whenever business demanded his attention. She had watched other wealthy families sacrifice their children's emotional well-being for social status and financial achievement, patterns that she recognized emerging in her own marriage despite Khalil's obvious love for his daughter. Her decision to flee had been reinforced by advice from other wives in their social circle who had learned too late that their husbands' promises to change and prioritize family were rarely kept when tested by business opportunities and social pressures. The culture that surrounded their elite lifestyle celebrated male achievement while expecting women to be grateful for financial security regardless of emotional neglect, patterns that Farah had seen destroy too many families to risk inflicting on her own daughter. The years that followed their disappearance had been difficult but purposeful, marked by constant vigilance and sacrifice that Farah considered worthwhile prices for protecting Amina from growing up feeling secondary to her father's business interests. She had monitored his continued success through business publications while feeling vindicated in her decision by reports of his increasing isolation and obsessive focus on professional achievements. The empire he had built after losing them seemed to prove that he had chosen correctly when forced to pick between family and fortune. But Amina's perspective on their reunion revealed complications that neither parent had anticipated. She felt anger toward both of them, toward a mother who had robbed her of the chance to know her father, and toward a father whose choices had made such drastic action seem necessary. The revelation that she was heir to vast wealth and social position felt overwhelming rather than exciting, a burden that complicated her understanding of her own identity and achievements rather than simply improving her circumstances. The young woman who had worked cleaning offices and sending money to support her mother's modest lifestyle discovered that she was actually the sole beneficiary of a business empire worth billions, that the father she had never known had spent decades and fortunes searching for her while building a legacy that was always intended for her benefit. The irony was crushing in its implications, the realization that they had been living in the same city for months without knowing that her work in his building had been subsidizing the very search that could have brought them together years earlier. The media attention that followed their reunion was intense and largely unwelcome, with reporters and social commentators dissecting every aspect of their story while offering opinions about family responsibility, parental rights, and the impact of wealth on personal relationships. Photos of Amina, in her cleaning uniform, contrasted with images of Khalil's luxury lifestyle, created narratives about privilege and sacrifice that simplified complex emotional truths into digestible entertainment for public consumption. The process of building a relationship as adults proved more complicated than any of them had anticipated. 22 years of separation had created fundamental differences in values, expectations, and communication styles that couldn't be bridged simply through shared genetics and good intentions. Amina's work ethic and modest lifestyle reflected her mother's influence and their economic circumstances, while Khalil's wealth and social position represented a world that felt alien and overwhelming to someone who had been raised to value privacy and authenticity over status and display. The greatest challenge was learning to trust each other, despite decades of absence and misunderstanding. Khalil struggled to accept that his daughter was a fully formed adult, with her own opinions and priorities, rather than the toddler who lived in his memories, while Amina had to reconcile the successful businessman who commanded global respect with the absent father whose choices had shaped her entire childhood. Both had constructed identities around his absence that needed to be reconstructed now that reunion was reality, rather than distant possibility. The financial inheritance that Khalil wanted to share immediately became a source of tension rather than joy, with Amina expressing concern that accepting his wealth would somehow validate the choices that had separated their family while undermining the values that her mother had worked so hard to instill. Her preference for earning her own way and maintaining independence clashed with his desire to provide everything he had been unable to give her during the years they were apart, creating conflicts that reflected deeper questions about love, responsibility, and the meaning of family. Farah's role in their developing relationship remained complicated and sometimes painful, her protective instincts conflicting with recognition that her daughter deserved the chance to know her father without interference or predetermined judgments. The guilt she felt about depriving them both of 2 decades together had to be balanced against continued concern that Khalil's lifestyle and priorities might still pose risks to Amina's emotional well-being and moral development. Her love for both of them made neutrality impossible, while her history with Khalil made trust extraordinarily difficult. The resolution that eventually emerged required compromise and growth from all 3 participants, with Khalil learning to prioritize relationships over achievements, while Farah acknowledged that her fears about his character had become outdated and unfair. Amina became the bridge between her parents, helping them understand how much they had both changed during their years apart, while insisting on her right to form independent relationships with each of them based on present reality rather than past grievances. Before we wrap this story up, I'd like to thank you for reaching this far. And if you enjoyed this story as much as I think you did, then be sure to show your support by liking and subscribing to this channel. Now back to the story. The transformation of their family structure took years to accomplish, with setbacks and misunderstandings that sometimes threatened to derail progress entirely. But the love that had been interrupted, rather than destroyed, provided a foundation strong enough to support the careful construction of new bonds that honored both their shared history and their individual growth during the separation. The wealth that had once threatened their unity became a tool for healing, funding educational and charitable initiatives that reflected values all 3 of them could support, while creating positive legacies that extended beyond their personal reconciliation. The office building where recognition had finally occurred became a symbol of how lives could intersect in unexpected ways, how assumptions about class and circumstance could blind people to connections that were hiding in plain sight. Amina's transition from cleaning staff to heir represented more than just changed circumstances, but rather a recognition that worth and dignity existed independent of social position or economic status, that family bonds could survive even the most determined attempts at separation. Years later, when Khalil looked back on the morning that changed everything, he understood that losing his family had been necessary for him to learn what truly mattered, while finding them again had been possible only because all 3 had grown into people capable of forgiveness and love that transcended past mistakes. The shattering coffee cup had marked not just a moment of recognition, but the beginning of reconstruction, the slow and careful building of relationships that were stronger for having been tested by separation and loss. The discovery that had seemed shocking in its implications ultimately revealed truths about resilience, hope, and the power of love to survive even the most impossible circumstances. What had begun as a story of failure and separation became one of redemption and reunion, proof that some bonds are strong enough to endure decades of silence while waiting for the right moment to reassert their claim on the hearts that created them.